really want to start diving into signs and behaviors that we knew that we were meant for the entrepreneurial path. I know for me, so much of it was insubordinance. I did not like to have anyone as my boss. I did not like rules. I like to play by my own rules. If you're not as smart as me, then I'm definitely not going to let you lead me. And so eventually I was on the verge of getting fired for most of my jobs. So that led to me being unemployable and needing like, oh, I think I'm supposed to be an entrepreneur. So I'm curious, we'll start with you, Ajay. What are some of those behaviors and things that you noticed within your career that led you to entrepreneurialism?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what you said is true of me as well. First and only time I've ever worked at a big company, I almost got fired within months because I was just like, these are the things that need to be fixed, and I'm going to go fix it. And someone else was like, that's not in your job description or even in your division. And it was like, screw it, I'm going to go do it. It was moving GSK, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, to the cloud. And so I went off and just started doing that. My direct manager almost fired me, and then luckily someone who was an entrepreneur in the organization, who still is my mentor to this day, actually had a call with him yesterday, kind of gave me cover fire, let me do it, and ended up moving. Actually, they became the first pharmaceutical company to move to the cloud because then, and now we've probably saved billions of dollars. Yeah, I mean, I remember I was on a different panel and they were asking, why are you an entrepreneur? And I remember that, when I thought about it, I was like, my answer is because I can't do anything else. If you want to make a ton of money or have like a good personal life, well, we'll get into, I'm sure, how you can have a good personal life, but like being an entrepreneur is not the easiest way to make money. And it's by far not the easiest path that you can take. But I think a lot of us do this because we have no other choice. We simply can't follow directions from everyone, from anyone else, and we love, building too much. And I certainly fall in that category.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. I really appreciate it. Cami, go ahead.
I was thinking a lot about this question, and I think the number one thing that stood out to me was a deep sense of like existential dread, and like walking into the office each morning or the kitchen, like really killed me. Like I remember I would cry on the way to work, driving in the car, because I so badly did not want to go. And I think for me, a lot of the same, like always thought I could do it better, even though I was like so young and didn't know anything, which, kind of listening to Ajay, I was like, oh, like, I kind of always thought something was wrong with me because I didn't want to I wasn't like really searching for a job after school super hard. I was like, eventually I worked for a couple different startups and got a good experience there, but I don't know. I really hated it. And I was always leaving, like always trying to leave to go and do exactly what I'm doing now. And so I think those were kind of the little signs for me that told me that, working for someone else probably wasn't going to work long term. And also my brother was an entrepreneur, and I always kind of wanted to do, or he is an entrepreneur, and I always wanted to do what he was doing. And so it was just kind of a clear path for me from the beginning. And, not sure how my dad feels about that, but yeah.
Thank you. And I love the fact that we don't really pay attention to those little signs, which are such a part of our blueprint, right? And so much of this work and really taking care of ourselves and nourishing ourselves as we're scaling a business is being in complete awareness of these traits that we have in ourselves. Like that is such a great part of us, that we love to lead, we love to problem solve, we can really deal with a lot of shit. We're really good at that. At the same time, it has its negative effects as well. And it affects our relationships, how to relate to other people, which is a lot of our work as entrepreneurs, because we think in our minds that, oh, well, they're going to love us because of like who we are in the world. And like, that's going to be enough. We don't really have to do anything, when in actuality, if our relationships fall away, we can't really be in our power and show up to do the big work that we're meant to do as entrepreneurs. So Colin, I would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, thanks. And great answers, guys. you're leading me towards better answers myself. So, in thinking about this question, but also, at Union Kitchen, we're scouting, recruiting, investing in people that want to start businesses. So, people that are becoming entrepreneurs or are entrepreneurs. And so really always trying to think about what are the traits, right? And so in thinking about like my own life and a lot of the people that we run into that do well when they start their businesses, it's kind of an arrogance that people have. So, for me, being young, early 20s, and just being really kind of arrogant that like I knew better, right? Kind of to both the stories we've heard so far, just, I can do this better. I can do that thing. I don't need to just do my job. I can, like, this person's a moron. And arrogance is not really a great thing. But in that perspective, it pulls you away from other structures, right? And in my case, it pulled me away from, working in different environments and really having few other choices than having to start my own business at some point. And so arrogance was kind of like this, it's a negative attribute, but it was a driver and a thing that pushed me towards wanting to, do more, do different, do it my way, which, later learned isn't always the right way.
Yeah, fantastic. And actually, I think, Colin, that actually leads us into a great conversation. I'm going to switch it from the questions that I originally had, and you bringing up that arrogance and that inferiority and superiority that we feel simultaneously all the time as entrepreneurs. So how, Cami, I'm going to ask you next, being in the entrepreneurial seat, finally making that decision and starting to build and scale your business. Tell me a little bit about more of those feelings of inferiority and superiority and times, or a time where it's gotten just too intense where you had to make a major shift in order to protect your mental health and sanity.
Well, I think, a distinguishing moment that pops to mind right away is like the first time someone called me an entrepreneur, which I was like in a room with my boyfriend at the time and someone else that worked with him. And, we were talking about my like little side business at the time. And she kind of looked at him and was like, well, Cami's an entrepreneur. And I was like, wait, me? Like, that's how you see me? And it was kind of one of those moments where you're like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, I am. Like, it's not just a little side thing. It is who I'm like going to be and what I'm going to do. So I think that's like the first moment I owned it and like stepped into that. And I think that was hard, like as a woman and being like a little younger and not really knowing like who you are. But I kind of forgot your question, but I'm just going to continue to say what I was saying, which is when you're an entrepreneur, like your ego or your identity is constantly being challenged. And so a lot of like, what I've been going through the past like year and a half is like rebuilding who I am. And the person that I'm rebuilding now is an entrepreneur. There's someone who is powerful and disrupts and changes systems, right? Whereas before it was less owning it and being more timid about it. And now I just feel more confident with who I am and what I'm doing. So it was a lot of shedding of identity and ego and rebuilding of who I am. And a lot of that is through understanding my emotions and understanding what comes up and what I'm feeling and how to express that and how to, make myself a better leader through that expression. So I think that came back around to kind of what you were asking me. But yeah.
Yes. And you bring up such a good point, Cami, specifically around that identity piece and how many of us identify as our business. There is no separation. There's complete enmeshment. And if it's going bad, we're a piece of shit. If it's going well, we are a rock star. We are untouchable. And so much of my own personal growth had to be in that inferiority and superiority complex. I am not my business. I am feeding into my business. Just like we look at relationships, I am not the person I'm dating or I'm with. There's a relationship that I am serving and then I'm adding or taking away from. And it's the same thing with the business. And that was monumental for me to be able to, am I feeding it? Am I taking it away? And is it owning me? Which I think in the startup culture, we're like, well, you have to grind, which you do have to grind. Like, know that the first year is like eating shit sandwiches and it's going to suck and it's survival. Eventually gets better. And when it gets better, we're not interested anymore. So you're like on to something else anyway. That's a whole other conversation in behavioral cycle. So with that, Ajay, I'd love for you to contribute to the conversation and let us know your feeling superior, inferiority, and like how that has driven decisions and made change for your own mental health journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting concept, this, inferiority, superiority. And Colin, you're absolutely, like, everything you said is absolutely right and applies to me as well. When we started Urban Stems, I was in a long distance relationship, sending flowers, just had bad experience after bad experience. And I was like, you know what, I can fucking do this better. So I'm going to do it. And then you get into it, you are doing it better. And then you have, a setback, as you do every week. And then you feel that inferiority, as you talked about, Katie, where you're like, I'm a piece of shit. I have no idea what I'm doing. And that like swing from like, the necessary, like, I can do this better, and the very unnecessary, everything is going to hell, is something that I think really hurts us mentally, and holds us back. One of the best pieces of advice I actually got was when starting Urban Stems was from another startup CEO who was on his, I think, third rodeo. And he was like, the highs are really high, the lows are really low, compress them both. So, every time you have a setback, even though it feels like the end of the world, you're going to get through it. You're going to learn from it and get better. And when you have the victories, great, celebrate them, but don't think that you're better than everyone else and, start, celebrating before you finish the race. Cause it's a marathon. So I mean, I don't know if I have, I feel like just being aware of all the, the swings, the high highs, the low lows, and modulating them a bit, and understanding that, neither is like the end all be all, has helped me balance that. I think that thing that we all have that Colin, you put so well, that superiority and inferiority feelings.
Yes. So good. And I love, Ajay, that you bring up like the awareness. Like that's the biggest piece. If you can just be aware and not judge those feelings, because automatically, again, we want to feel like a piece of shit for feeling like shit. And then it adds to it, as opposed to like, ooh, I'm either, because I find that even being high on ourselves and feeling really good is super dangerous too. So like it's either side of those spectrums. So just being aware and be like, ooh, I'm not doing too well. What do I need to do right now to nourish myself and feel good and feel connected to myself? Or like, oh man, like I totally think I'm God right now. I need to like chill it out a little bit and calm down. It's okay. And I'm not being judgmental, but like, let's laugh about this. Cause I love to feel like God, like all the time, especially, the entrepreneurial journey leads to that in ways, and also the other way as well. So, Colin, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm sure my team won't let me feel like that. They will. They'll be quick to humble that. So, there's two things I thought you were saying that was really interesting. Kind of the superiority, inferiority. The kind of way I describe it is the humility that you have to learn, right, to be an entrepreneur. That feeling of arrogance, that like, I got this, I'm the best. It works for a little bit for a lot of people. Or for some people, right? But it stops. You hit a wall, and you have to learn how to kind of deal with that, the new reality, right? And some people try to run through that wall and they burn themselves out, and they're done, they disappear. And so the thing that I've thought about is, okay, when that does happen, when you've exhausted your strength, right? Your mental strength, your physical strength, your emotional strength, what do you do? And I've thought about a lot of leaning in on, the feeling, the humility that drives to you. And then what do you do with that? And for me, I've been thinking about this a lot, it's okay, great. This is the learning opportunity. And not only like, how do I learn to solve this one problem, but how do I set kind of a culture within myself of learning again and again and again. And as I'm saying that, it's just relating to the other point you made, Katie. we go so hard, right? And we build an identity around going so hard. And then it starts to get easier. Maybe not after a year, maybe more like 10 years for me. But it starts to get a little bit easier and we get bored, like we built an ego around feeling busy and stressed and like, right? And I've been thinking a lot too about what's the antidote to that, because I don't want to be the type of person who needs to be stressed to feel value, to feel worth, right? And so I've also been leaning in both on that feeling of humility, which pushes me to learn, but then also that feeling of like, I'm not going crazy with stress. What do I replace that with? And I've been thinking a lot about also, how do I learn? How do I learn about a process? How do I learn about wine or something new about fermentation in food, or about leadership? Whatever it may be. So yeah, humility and learning, I think kind of a fascinating thing that becomes so integral when our arrogance, our superiority runs out, which it should, right? It needs to, otherwise we're pretty unsufferable people.
Yeah. And I find even in my clients, and Audrey can point to this, it's so challenging for us to know how to have fun. Like we know how to have fun in business. That's not a problem. But outside of that, in our life, it's like, what are your hobbies? What brings you joy? And so often it's like headlights. Like, I don't know. I've never learned how to do those things. And so much of our journey as entrepreneurs and leaders is building this fuller life and investing in those areas as well. And I love, Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour Work Week. He's like, we all know that we're going to want to work till we're 80 years old. There's no 65 retirement for us. So knowing that, how are we having many retirements throughout our career? And are we planning those out so that we are actually getting used to enjoying ourselves, living our lives, and not just trying to go from dopamine hit to dopamine hit. So that's going to lead me into the next final question before we get into questions from the audience. Cami, would you tell us about, one of your major mental sort of breakdowns in your business that was really pivotal, and how you protected your sanity during that?
I think COVID was probably my biggest pivot and transition in my business thus far, which, essentially I went from living in one place, having a retail space there, having to close the retail space, move out of my apartment, go through a breakup, figure out how I was going to pivot my entire business online, start paying rent, and like become financially, solvent within myself, all during the first week of the pandemic in March 2020. So that triggers a breakdown of all sorts, right? Kind of broke down home, work, family, right? So that definitely sent me onto a journey of like, okay, damn, like, what do I want? Right? Like, my business was making good money, but I essentially lost all my in-person clientele. And so I had to then put everything online. I had to put all my wellness programming on Zoom within like a week, kind of convince my clients that, this was just as valuable to be one-on-one, right? Like over a computer. Had to convince my groups that like, yeah, like in-person yoga or virtual yoga is just as good as in-person yoga. I mean, it's different, right? So we all just had to adjust rapidly. But being super lonely and having no idea like who I was without another person like by my side was definitely a huge trigger for me. So that sent me on a journey of just like really understanding what it means to feel alive. And for me, that is experiencing a spectrum of emotion. So feeling a pain that is so deep. Well, on the other side of that, is joy, right? So to feel something extreme, like an extreme, what, we correlate as a negative emotion. Well, on the other side of that is a very positive emotion. So I really began to understand that, to feel one thing is like, wow, like what else is available on the other side? So a lot of the pandemic was kind of coming into that and understanding like, okay, like what do I want in life? Because now everything's broken down. I can rebuild. So it's very humbling to start at rock bottom, especially during a collective rock bottom. And I would say my business definitely reflects that now. I really let go of all the things that were, I think, holding me back from being able to have a cohesive brand. And now I feel really confident being where I am. Of course, there's always the like, am I doing enough? Like really having to not equate busyness with, value. So I really resonate with that, Cullen. But yeah, that is probably the biggest mental hurdle I've had to face in the last 5 years. Because my business turned 5 years old this month, which was exciting. So not quite at that 10-year mark, but excited to be there eventually.
Thank you so much for sharing yourself with us.
Yeah.
Colin?
I think on that theme actually of COVID, when COVID hit, for me, I'd been working so hard and trying to build this business and build all these other businesses and really attaching myself to that success. And with COVID hitting, all these feelings I had, like just fear, right? And fear that you couldn't really share, you couldn't really talk about, all that became very tangible, right? You're just like, wow, like COVID just happened and like the food industry is dead, right? That was like the first thoughts. And so there was kind of like a few moments, days, weeks, whatever, of mourning that. And I'd say it was actually probably the most important thing, in my life to date, because it allowed me to kind of disconnect and, unattach myself from, I have to be successful. I have to make this thing work. This must be right. And get more into like the why, why do I like doing this? Why is it good? What can we do for, for our customers, whatever it is, that's the business. And so that like, basically just like the fears becoming tangible, becoming, mostly real, though we did avoid the true deep pain of failure, which was good. But yeah, I mean, that was terrifying thing to have those things become real, and then have to face them and kind of deal with them emotionally, and then try to chart kind of a new way of thinking and being from there. So, definitely like a breakdown, because all the things that I'd been propping up were no longer there, and having to kind of reset a business, my ego and a lot of relationships around that was fascinating, really hard, and like wonderful, and in many ways like a blessing to have to go through that and have just the things around me to be able to come out of that in good shape. So I think a lot about that.
Can you share some of the things that you've gained or that have come into your life because of that situation?
I think I look at, relationships, both at work and out of work, like very differently. I think a lot about just like, what are the things that I'm attaching myself to, or attached myself to, and how do I think about those just more cleanly, right? How do I not need to control everything that's around me, and hopefully, let go of that arrogance that these things need me, that I must be the one to do this and fix this. And so it's just been a deepening of the humility, and then to focus and to kind of let things be what they are. Certainly for the business, that's meant, we let go a lot of business, and reframed and focused what Union Kitchen does more tightly. And that was awesome. And then kind of like my own life, same thing, right? Let go of some things, let go of a lot of things, and tried to refocus on, just like, who I wanted to be, not only, for others, but, more importantly for myself.
Thank you. Awesome. All right, Ajay.
Yeah. So much like everyone on this panel and probably everyone in the audience, I've been through plenty of crisis moments. with the business. 5 years ago, someone pulled a $20 million of funding they were going to put in, and we were down to 2 to 3 weeks of payroll. We went through a period where we had to lay off a third of our staff, things that were really objectively tough. But like we've all been kind of talking about, because we're built a certain way, those periods weren't the periods where we had our breakdowns. In fact, we're almost more comfortable in those periods where there's chaos all around us. And Colin, something you said spurred something that happened in a lot of those situations, which was I was like, I put on the hero cape and said, I'm going to fix this because that's my job and I can. And unintentionally left a lot of people out who wanted to help and could have helped. Just so many lessons. I know it's taking a little bit different direction than, but that certainly has happened with me. Ended up being, I think much more comfortable in those crisis moments. The part where, I think after that, it was, the breakdown, I think, was more of a slow burn. In realizing coming out of those things that I really hadn't been prioritizing myself at all. I've been like trained to fight fires really, really efficiently, but never really take any time to take care of myself. Because of that, I think I just had a really unhealthy personal life, really unhealthy just habits, really everything. Wasn't putting anything into myself because I felt like I needed to be that hero. And when you naively, and startup culture really plays into this, unfortunately, like you think that any time you take away from the business for yourself, you're cheating on your business, which is simply not true. It's easy to think that way because there's this hustle culture that you have external investors who have put in millions of dollars, and you're like, all right, and if I go to the gym, that's an hour I'm taking away from the people that have entrusted me, the tons of people working for us, the millions of dollars put in by these investors, all of that stuff. And so you just feel like, all right, I cannot do a single goddamn thing for myself because that's taking away from everything that's been entrusted to me. And it took me so long to figure out that is so false. Because the more that you invest into yourself, the better decisions you make. And startups come down to, you do have to work hard, but you want to work hard down the right path. And a lot of times, if you're not investing into yourself, you're just working, and this has happened countless times at Urban Stems, where we were just working really hard, but hard down the wrong path. And had we, I think, invested more in ourselves, and figured out made a couple more correct decisions, we would have wasted a lot less effort. And so now, Kitty knows this, but I'm investing a lot more into my own well-being and happiness, and I'm able to run 2 companies with less effort than it took me to run 1 company. And so it's really hard to believe, especially as a young entrepreneur. But if you guys take away one thing from this, just invest in yourself, invest in your own happiness. It'll pay enormous dividends to the business.
Brilliant. And to double back on what you're saying, Ajay, I think we have such a hard concept of, like you said, like even believing that belief system. And how do you do that, especially as a young entrepreneur? So if anyone out there is a young entrepreneur, think of yourself as an elite athlete. Think of yourself going into like professional baseball, major league, top actor. Like, you are not going to show up for the big movie on set or the big game exhausted. You are not going to play at the level, the elite level that you are expected to play at. So we need to start thinking of ourselves in that way as elite athletes, or just the elite. right? But not better than anyone, but knowing how to really nurture ourselves to be able to show up in that power regularly. What do we need to do that? Because that's when we become super attractors. That's when people want to do business with us. That's when people want to buy from us, when we are totally in our power. So I want to open it up to questions. Does anyone have a question that they would love to answer this awesome panel? Don't be shy.
So I think for questions, people can put it in the chat. Maybe keep going, and then I can try to facilitate any questions that come up, Katie. So if anybody has any questions, please add them to the chat.
And I want to just give a shout out to Jessica. For me, it's my love of innovating, creating, and building with the absolute necessity to have general wealth. I love that. I love your energy. And I even invite you to change that necessity to entitled. I'm absolutely entitled to have generational wealth. It's coming to you. It's not something that's a need, because you're a badass and it's already in you and it's going to attract you. How did you overcome fear during your startup phase from being an employee? Ooh. Can you actually, Kanisha, do you mind reframing that question? And the one thing I'm just would love clarity on, how do you overcome fear during, actually, Colin, why don't you start with that question?
Absolutely. Well, so the way I interpret that, and you have to tell me if I got it wrong, but, I think maybe the fear, two things of like, working for someone and like doing good work for them and being afraid that they'll tell you it's not good. And then the other way I interpret that would be, the fear of going from a job with a salary and a lifestyle to not a job, not a salary, and nothing that any of us would describe as a healthy lifestyle. And so how does one overcome that? I don't know that you do. I think you lean into it, and you are afraid, and that's going to drive you to be purposeful with your time. For me, when early on, that was working my butt off, at all times. Not only feeling bad about going to the gym, which I didn't do, but feeling bad about like taking a shower, that was like more than 5 minutes because oh my God, I should be doing something. And so, I think for me, it's not overcoming that fear, but really channeling it into something, more positive, and turning that into, goals and something that's going to teach me to learn and to develop skills that, are great for the business. And then as you get further along, for me at least, that are also great for me as a person, because I have to build myself.
Fantastic.
Yeah. If I can add some, that was a great answer, Colin. And if I can add some practical advice that worked, at least for me, is save up a year's worth of salary. So like you can pay yourself for a year and then just go fucking do it. I think there are a lot of people out there who advise that you kind of make it your side hustle on, your nights and weekends thing. And I think that does work for some people, especially if you can't get to a year, but of salary. But for me, just like we didn't even, we were actually doing I don't know if Katie, I don't even know if you know this, before Urban STEM started, we were actually doing a social credit score, using like social media data to build a credit score for people who are new to this country or just don't have enough history for a credit score. Realized that landlords, like within a month, landlords didn't want that and switched to flower delivery. So that like for that function of like, we're doing something, me and my co-founder, who have been best friends for a long time, that like mentality really forced us to just go do it. And the most important part of starting a company is literally just doing, because you have no idea what your customers are going to want. You have no idea if your product's going to have any resonance. Like you can sit around and think of business plans and whatever as much as you want. It does not matter. You're at 0.0 until you just start doing it. But once you start doing it, you start figuring out a lot of stuff. And it just builds upon itself.